I'm really pleased to be here today to talk through where we are and hopefully where we plan to be and how we hope to engage with you in the sector and increasingly with service users about how we shape the program going forward. I'm conscious that Stephen Martin's speaking after lunch, and so I don't want to replicate some of the stuff that he may be talking about or to touch on some of the stuff that Ricky and others may be talking about too. So if there's a wee bit of duplication, I beg your forgiveness. Okay, I just want to set out some of the context today about where we are, some of the current issues to reflect on as Karen was saying earlier, and I was particularly interested in Pamela's work around TYC because, like Cameron, I have been involved with DSD in being up at the Health Committee, so it's been a very helpful and interesting process around how we shape services for older people going forward and the connections and relationships we need to build with health and social services. And I was very taken with a comment that Colette made around the future of sheltered housing, because I think it is one area that we need to move up the agenda and get that stronger on the health and social care agenda, because it's a missing jewel in the crown, really, that not properly recognised, not properly placed. And all the evaluation that we've done over the last couple of years shows it to be a very effective, very great service user satisfaction, and an important part in delivering against home as the hub in the community. So if you're looking for models that work, we already have it in Northern Ireland. And I think the other thing about sheltered housing in Northern Ireland is different from the rest of the UK. We didn't have one bedroom or bed sits. We've got a good quality stock that's generally held in high regard. I want to talk a wee bit about where we want to see going moving forward and some of the immediate priorities for this year. They've been touched on by various people this morning and later on this afternoon, but I wanted to give you a sense of where we see that going. For us, the Supporting People programme is critical, and it's important for us to remember it's about delivering services for vulnerable adults. It has been hugely effective, in my view, in terms of creating partnerships and sustaining partnerships, but it is all around developing services that support independent living. Cameron was quite right to refer to the brand issue around, do people understand the programme and accept what it is when we see it branded as SP? And I was talking just before over coffee about my experience last week at the Health Committee. And we were given a housing's input into the Transforming Your Care, older people, support living kind of discussion. And we were losing our way a wee bit with the Health Committee reps until we come back to describing and giving them the experience of what Cedar Court is. So when you see Supporting People as Cedar Court, they get it. When you see the brand, maybe it's not as clear, it's not as open to what it should be. But certainly the MLAs that I've spoken to and the MLAs at the committee last week, because 4 or 5 of them have dedicated projects like Helmworth Court in their constituency, be it Barnholt, be it the Brook, be it even Ungara and Enniskillen. They see the value of these projects, and that makes the argument for them about what Supporting People is much better than we have been able to do as a branding exercise. So for us in the organisation, it is a programme that we highly value, that I personally think has made a tremendous contribution to transforming people's lives, whether it's a single homeless person, whether it's a woman escaping domestic violence, whether it's about promoting independence around older people in the community, has made a huge contribution through, but that's because of the partnership with the sector and because of the delivery of organisations like yourself. So sometimes I think we need to think again about how we get the image and profile of the services out there, because they're doing tremendous work. Wee bit of facts and figures. This year's budget, just under £72 million, which is phenomenal in terms of, and pay tribute to the Executive Board and DSD about maintaining and holding the ring fenced. And as Cameron says, we're at that point in transition, so we want to hold on to what's worked and what we want to do going forward. We have over 100 providers, and in some cases, some people think that's too many, others people think let 1,000 flowers bloom, but relationships with over 100 organisations provide services and over 850 different services across Northern Ireland, supporting at any one time 17,000 individuals, but increasingly that figure over a year is probably 23,000 to 25,000 people who use the service, who are coming through, particularly around homelessness. I know Ricky will touch on later. We've got to get smarter about delivering better services for homeless individuals and how we move them from that crisis through to sustaining tenancies or prevent homelessness in the first place, which would be all our goal. So critical impact, and I know Cameron and Phil Saunders is here after lunch to talk about some piece of work evaluation there around the effectiveness of the programme. But for me, I see it every day when I see the projects. I maybe don't get out as often as I should do or would like to, but when you go down to a project like I did 2 Fridays ago in Lisbon, when it was the opening, a soft opening of a new floating support service based in Lisbon with Mahond Aftercare, and you hear the stories of the young people who have been supported and their transformation in their lives, you get it much more than QAFs or performance workbooks or SPOC or any of those kind of things. So hugely valuable piece of work. And it's always kind of humbling to go back out there to the services to see the reality when you talk to individuals about their experience of the service they've received and how that's transformed their lives. So people do need to see the great value they do. So that's just a wee bit about where we are in terms of the current state of the play of the sector. It's a significant employer as well. About 4,500 full-time equivalent jobs are created through this program. And in some localities, some of the organizations who receive the funding are equivalent of small to medium-sized businesses in terms of employment opportunities. And I welcome the debate after lunch around the issues around living wage and how we recruit and sustain the workforce. So critically important things for us in terms of how we go about it. And in terms of making the argument to departments, it's also about the cost benefits to other agencies or departments in the Stormont Assembly, but it's also about the contribution to the local economy. These jobs are locally based, local community jobs, and it reflects some of those issues that we need to take account of when we start to think about shaping how we commission and procure services in the future. Just about where we are as an organisation, where the Housing Executive and where we are in terms of the Supporting People programme. The organisation continues to go through its restructuring, and there's a couple of things I just want to touch on there. From January, there's been a soft restructuring internally in the Housing Executive, and that's had some great benefits from my perspective, my personal perspective, because it's brought the homelessness and SP together under a single regional director. And some of you may have been at a relaunch of our homelessness strategy last week, and I'll let Ricky touch on some of the nuances coming out of that. But what was important for me there was that for the first time, we're bringing the commission and thinking around the front-end services of the experience of someone who comes to us with homelessness with the delivery of services. And so we have a real opportunity to create better outcomes and deliver better services for homeless people who present to us and who you work with. And remember, about a third of the programme, about a third of that £70-odd million goes to frontline homelessness services. So there's a real opportunity by bringing the homelessness strategy and the SP strategy together in that opportunity to create better synergies. And hopefully, Ricky will touch a bit on that, but last week it was the start of a new way of working for us in terms of how we work with the homelessness sector, provider, statutory, but also increasingly the service user and their experience. But also interestingly, as part of that process, Mags Lightbody, who's the current acting chief executive of the organisation, has started what she's called the Journey to Excellence. And that's been an interesting piece of work. We have some consultants in with us at the moment looking at our customer journey, following individuals who come to us, who present to us today, and their journey through to getting a house or getting from homelessness to temporary accommodation to a house. And I must say the feedback I got on Friday was challenging, because it would suggest to me that there's a lot more we need to do to create a better journey to respond to individual service users, that we've got to be mindful that our systems can get in the way of how we deliver services. And when we come on to some of the policy challenges that Steve will talk about later on in the policy review, and which Cameron's hinting at, we need to be conscious and mindful of systems and how systems can create the wrong kind of processes and services for individuals. So we need to be mindful of that, whether it's procurement or commissioning or quality standards. So we need to be mindful that we need to always look at what we do and the processes deliver the outcomes. The second big issue for me going forward this year and beyond is the policy review, which Cameron has touched around, and you'll hear more from Stephen Martin from the DSD after lunch. And the terms of reference are in your pack, and it's good to have them and to see them out there. I sit on the steering group, and there's been 2 meetings of the steering group so far. I find it interesting about how we shape and inform that process and where we go. Obviously, we have a personal commitment to the programme, and it's very interesting to see and hear opinion and experience of people in England, Wales and Scotland about their journeys and their policy reviews and where SP is now in England, Wales and Scotland. I think a good reference point for us is what has been happening in Wales, because in Wales it's still a ring-fence project, and there's some interesting stuff come out of the Welsh Assembly there recently, which is very helpful to our debate going forward. And I'd recommend that you all have a good look at what's going on in England, Wales and Scotland and certain local authorities. So it's a major piece of work. You'll notice in the terms of reference, in one of the scoping exercises, it talks around the issue around procurement, about whether we should move to procurement. And that's a big issue which Cameron's asked me to touch on, which sometimes I'd rather not. But I'm always mindful of the Supporting People programme. We're not going out to buy stationary orders of A4 or widgets or boxes of Mars bars, as much as I like Mars bars. What we're talking about is 80% of the funding, 85% of that £70 million goes to employ staff. And those staff work with vulnerable individuals. So it's a relationship issue, it's a people issue for me, and we tend to, in the programme structure, forget that process. So Cameron's quite right to flag up the comment from that you saw earlier about the drive to the bottom and the cost issues around procurement. There are good ways of doing procurement, and there are difficult ways of doing procurement. And you sometimes don't do enough to think about the unintended consequences of the processes you put in place. And I think the housing association sector and their experience on the new build side have a good voice there to influence what kind of procurement process, if any, emerges out of this process. So it's a significant piece of work. Interestingly, within it, we've commissioned a piece of work to look at the sister piece of work to the float and support evaluation, which is the accommodation-based stuff, which we signed off last week in a consultant appointment. I think Stephen will touch a bit more of that in the afternoon. But it's a significant policy review that will shape the future of the programme going forward. In many ways, it echoes a lot of the stuff that's in our revised SP strategy, which was a discussion of some debate and discussion with DSD in the sector over the last 2 years, series of consultation events last year that informed a new strategy and a new action plan agreed by our board and with DSD. And within that action plan, we touch on the need to think about moving away from the current regime of grants to a commissioning stroke procurement, whether that's full EU tendering in the way that we understand it, or is it some kind of model that adopts the principles of procurement around openness and transparency. I think it's for us as a sector to shape and influence and make the case about what that looks like in this policy review. I'm also minded to look at the last page of the terms of reference to reflect that there is a period between April 15 and September 16 around any consultation process that emerges from the policy review. So there's a year for the policy review and then a consultation process. So you're still looking at an 18-month to 2-year kind of implementation phase around where that takes us. From my perspective, we have increasingly come under some criticism around how do we decide which voluntary agency gets which service. And it comes to light when we have difficulties, when a service provider says they're not willing to provide a service, and we say, well, who's willing to provide it and who could provide it? We had an experience a couple of years ago in a homeless service organisation come to us and said, we're not going to continue to deliver this service. At that point in Belfast, any one of 7 or 8 homelessness organisations had the wherewithal to take that service on. And the question at that time is, what's the justification for provider A over provider B? And that sits heavily with us as a public sector organisation with issues around good governance. But the big thing for me that came out of our Support and People strategy last year was around rethinking the commissioning structures. And we listened, we did listen. Whether we accepted and heard what you said all the time, we did listen to you. So one of the issues that you raised with us from a service user for provider organisation, umbrella bodies like Federation and Council of Homeless, is that representation on the commissioning structures. So we have come up with a revised commissioning structure which breaks the programme down into 3 distinct areas: homelessness, mental health and disability, and older people. That's not to say that other client groups are lost in there. These are just generic terms. DSD, our board, and the commission body have agreed to revise commissioning structures. There'll still be a regional commission body, but there will be commissioning structures for these 3 areas. We already have it embryonically in the learning disability. There's a Bamford group which met yesterday, which I'm on, which is co-chaired between ourselves and the health board, which the 5 trusts are there. And that was a useful way of challenging and understanding where we are in terms of delivery of those resettlement targets that was referred to earlier. But interestingly for me, and maybe Ricky will reflect on this, say whether we're getting it right or not, is for us, we recognise in the programme for the last number of years that homelessness wasn't getting its strong feature. The local area partnerships tended to focus on older people services and the health and social care priorities around Bamford and physical and sensory disability, dementia, older people services. Homelessness was in there but wasn't, in a sense, getting its fair weight or reflected enough. So this is a way of counterbalancing that. So last week when we relaunched the homelessness strategy, we also listened to and had discussions with the sector and DSD about the structures for delivery. So there will be a regional housing structure with 3 regional housing planning processes below that that will be interagency and will have the voice of the sector. That's a big change for us on the homelessness side because we've never had that. We've had local homeless action plans that none of you in the homelessness sector have probably ever seen. We've talked to ourselves for 10 years about what they look like. So there's a change there. I'm not saying we've got it perfectly right, but sometimes you have to start on these processes. So that structure will start to emerge through the summer. But critically for me, to develop, the outcome of that will be an informed commissioning plan about what we need to do to address homelessness in terms of responding, but also prevention. What it looks like in Derry, as for Manor, as in Belfast, is locally informed, top top down but bottom up. So hopefully those new structures will start to listen to and respond to the challenge that you've thrown out to us in terms of provider engagement, but also service user engagement. For me, a big plus of that structure, which we'll start to see in place then, is that we'll have a stronger feature on some of the key objectives that we want to deliver in terms of SP strategy and homelessness strategy. And hopefully you'll start to see some synergy around those two processes. But maybe you'll get a better feel for that from Ricky when she talks to you. On the mental health and learning disability, it's predominated by issues around Bamford, and this morning you'd heard about the March 15 targets around resettlement, about no one being in hospital who needs to be there, who doesn't need to be there, other than for treatment. So a significant piece of work. We're still talking around 80 to 90 people who need to be resettled by the end of March. Supported housing makes a contribution, and a significant contribution to that process, and it's testimony to a lot of the associations here today, providers, that your contribution to that process has enabled us to move towards that target. It has been challenging, and there have been lessons learned that have gone back to the department. One of them really has been around, for example, the community consultation around purchasing existing satisfactory properties, and that has caused great difficulty for all involved, from social services, housing association, ourselves, and the families and carers, because it has been a difficult process. Why do we consult with the community about who moves in next door to them when I don't consult with about who my neighbour is? There's a basic human right issue there, and I think the department is starting to listen to that argument and shape it forward. But on the Bamford side of things, we're already thinking beyond March 15. The first order priority of the Bamford mental health learning disability targets was around achieving the March 15 resettlement targets. But it hasn't been the only thing that's been preoccupying us. We've got to plan for the future. So we've got to look at how the community infrastructure supports people who won't be able to go to hospital in the future, or shouldn't be going to hospital. But it's also about those elderly carers who have sons and daughters and they want to plan for their futures. So those issues are coming upstream as well. And there's an agreement between the two departments that we will work together at Health and Social Services about informing what the future needs are in the next CSR period, and that's a plus. We haven't been too good at that in the previous history. Whenever we got money, health didn't. Whenever health did, we didn't. So it's a real issue for us, and an agreement that we'll work together smarter to inform the future CSR about the needs for new services. And then older people, it's a topic of the moment. It'll be very interesting what the Health Committee's findings will be on their inquiry. I think it will be some good stuff. I think housing will come out of it well. And there'll be some issues, I think, around TYC about how it informs the future. But the big issue for me is, as Colette said earlier, and as Cameron and others reflected on, the role of sheltered accommodation in that. Funding. At the moment, we've secured CSR 4-year period. One of the benefits of that CSR capital and revenue money was an ability then to plan and to give people confidence that the money was there to deliver it. There are other challenges to reflect on about the challenge of delivery, but that settlement of the CSR gave great confidence to be able to go out and do what we need to do, and it'd be interesting to see how the next CSR process informs it. But I wouldn't underestimate the value of having a clear funding commitment to being able to do the things we need to do. You would argue that the resettlement target of March 15 could have been delivered much earlier if we'd had a clarity of purpose and funding around that purposes. And I think it's some real interesting lessons for the health side and the two departments in terms of thinking around older people, because there is a real body of work there, the demographic time bomb, the issues around prevalence of data, individual choices is a significant issue for us. Like Cameron, I was equally impressed by Professor Tinker's contribution to the Health Committee, and it did pose some real issues for us around different ways of working and new models. That idea of fostering for older people and co-sharing is real interesting for me, because on the young people side, we've worked hard, and Ricky maybe bear testament to this, with the health side and the health board on developing a support lodging model for young homeless people, either leaving care or the youth homeless, which is a version of support in a family setting. And we're starting to roll that out in the Western and Northern Trust to make it a regional service. But it has taken 4 to 5 years to get to this point, and often not because of not wanting to do it, but getting to that point. So I think there is some interesting stuff coming out of that, and hopefully the Health Committee report will give us some food for thought going forward. I've touched on the commission structures, and we'll start to see them move. What is interesting is, as a result of the TYC, or maybe it's given us greater focus, is that I've been speaking to Kevin Keenan, Commissioner at the board. He's been part of a series of processes that we've engaged with DSD and association around about how to unpick some of the blockages to older people's service development. So Kevin has agreed to that regional commission structure that he will chair with us, a regional commissioning structure SP for older people and bring the 5 trusts so that we'll have some ways of working here that address the future needs of older people. And for us, it's an opportunity to bring in and reflect on the valuable role of sheltered accommodation. But equally important for us is those community-based floating support services. And I know in Fold's briefing in PAC here, they talk about their hub and spoke model, which is in the great North Belfast, Newton Abbey area. And to me, that's a real priority for us going forward in terms of the shape of services. So if you want to see a model that really replicates what the home and the hub and the shift left is, that's a good example as there any. Service development for us, critical moment. We've got £2.5 million extra money this year for new service development. I know the sector would like to see some of that shift left to increase in current funding levels, and there is a discussion we've had with the department for some time, and we've updated our business case in terms of making the case for an uplift to existing level of SP funding. And I understand the pressure that's put on providers in terms of the 6-7 years about what that's looked like and what people have done. But a big issue for us is I think there are 37 new services opening this year, and that reflects the cumulative effect of new build programs coming to fruition and open this year. So in this month, if you were running this seminar in 3 to 6 months' time, in addition to the photographs of Cedar Court, Barnholt, and Helmsworth, you should be looking at Kieran Court in Newton Ards, which is an Apex South Eastern Trust scheme, which is opening now. So these things are happening, they're really positive, and they're highly, highly valued. And so we'll see how that. So it's a massive piece of work for us to focus on getting those service development rights. Cameron made a good point, not just continue to do the same thing because we've always done it that way. So I think there is some learning around other people's services that we need to look at. A major focus on, obviously, new services for people with learning disability coming out of hospital. But increasingly, we have had a huge and important contribution around young people and young homelessness services. And again, I pay tribute to Ricky in terms of keeping that structure together with health and social services around planning for young people coming out of either youth homelessness or the care side. Regulation inspection. I couldn't see whether any of my colleagues from RQA are here today and whether it's free to say what. No, I'm only joking. We've got a very good relationship with RQA, and there is a joint departmental group looking at regulatory gaps and regulatory issues. And in good fashion, they've asked us to do some work with RQA. The first stepping point for that is we're trying to get a memorandum of understanding together to look at what we do. But we're looking at things around service targeting. That sounds a bit mean and nasty, but what we mean is if we're going out to look at one provider, can we do joint inspections? What does that look like? Can we bring our expertise together to look at where there are issues, but also just to shift the focus not just from enforcement and people not meeting standards, but also to service improvement, that fine balance between where we want to go and the backwards. So me and my team meet regularly with Dermot Parsons and the team around issues like service user finance. You'll have seen a report on the RQA website a couple of weeks ago about service user finance, and many of you will in the sector know what that means. So I anticipate going forward that we'll have a smarter relationship with RQA that should reduce some of the bureaucracy from a provider's perspective, but will challenge us going forward in terms of raising standards of service for vulnerable people. Contract management, from my perspective, is that we continue to roll that forward from an SP process point of view. We're finding that very helpful. And we're seeing huge, in terms of the validation of the QAF and the quality standards, we're seeing fantastic innovation and service delivery and service improvement in the sector. And again, that's of benefit to you. What is interesting is some of these aspects of the program, some of the core building blocks are starting to be lost elsewhere, and I think we need to be careful what we keep and what we hold on going forward in the policy review. So in terms of priorities going forward for this year and hopefully beyond, I wanted to please and impress Ricky, so I prioritised homelessness funding through commission processes, so she'll say nice things. Yes. But we have recognised and we've listened to the sector, we've brought the homelessness and SP bit together, and we've heard what you wanted to do in terms of commission structures. And I reflect on that. Delivery resettlement strategy, as Pamela was saying earlier, we're on track to meet the resettlement targets by March 15. There may be a little bit about people moving in post-March because buildings been ready and properties been ready to move into, but broadly we're there. It is in the last phase. I see Mihal Quilly from the Southern Trust here, but we're in the last phase. I think the Southern Trust have met their targets, the others behind it. But we're in that last phase where some of the more difficult and complex clients are moving out, and the cost structures and the right services and the resilience of the services to meet that need now and going forward is an area that's sort of some thinking at the moment. And it doesn't stop in March 15. We don't step and say we've done the job there, the resettlement target has been met. we are looking at future issues downstream. Priority for us, and as I was with the Patient and Client Council on Friday and with them at the end of the month, is around that issue for us around supporting older carers who have a child with a disability, maybe in their 20s or 30s, and they want to plan for when they're not there. And we need to be a bit more creative around that. And some of the ideas that Professor Tinker reflected on, and which Cameron reflected on, are probably something we should need to look at. Shared care. Why do we ask people to move if they can inherit their properties? What are the options there that we can explore better? Some issues around co-ownership and mortgage, and I know Triangle have explored that in the past, and I think we need to give some fresh impetus to some of the new models that we need to look at. Aligning regulatory inspection regimes, that's really just touching on, with a program, a body of work that we hope to get through by September, October, some proposals, some ideas about how we all work better together with our QIA, particularly around the learning disability and mental health services. Obviously, big focus on service user finances, but there's a body of work there that we want to get out there. Increasingly, we need to get out there and explain to people about why we're doing it and hear back from you if this makes some sense. Certificate Fund for new service development. While the CSR gave us significant new capital and revenue money to deliver new services, it doesn't mean that if we don't get such a good settlement going forward that we can't do great things. I think there is a real issue within the homelessness sector, a positive issue around how we best use the £30 million that goes to homelessness services. So sometimes it may need not of new money, there may be some shift lefts in the homelessness sector, but it's been able, as Cameron was saying earlier, to be able to manage that process to invest in the transition of services. And this is not about one type of model good and the other type of model bad. It's about saying how to respond to meet the needs of people who are homelessness, how to make sure that we prevent homelessness, and how to respond quickly to move people out of that experience of homelessness into their own tenancies. Service user involvement is one of the areas I think we've been weakest on in the last 10 years in service user involvement. But we recognise that we need to look at that. So one of the challenges in those new commission structures is how we engage with service users. And we engage with service users really well at the service level. So the feedback into the QOF and the quality assessment of services is fantastic. And you see it when you go around the projects. What we haven't done as well is get the voice of the service user as strongly as heard in the shaping and in the strategy and the commission of new services. And there are ideas that we have around that. We've just recently awarded some funding to Chinny project there to allow that piece of work they're doing with young homelessness people to get their voice heard. And it's a fantastic piece of work, some great stories, and some really helpful insights in terms of how we shape services for that client group going forward. Maybe Ricky might want to say about it. But it's an area that we will need to do more at the strategic level. And again, we need to do that in a sense with you. Efficiency and value for money, that's really code for procurement. Now, we've had a good look at it and to inform the policy review. We've had a look at what the Scottish Executive and DCLUG, Welsh Assembly, local authorities are using. One of the benefits of SPOC, and most providers probably say, what are you talking about? There are no benefits to SPOC. But one of the benefits of SPOC is there's a lead officers meeting every year where we go over to meet the 50-odd local authorities in England and Scotland who use the system. And that tends to be, for the techies, a wee bit about the system, but for me it's more about the policy context in which the lead officers in Birmingham, Hampshire, across Glasgow are working in to get their insights and their honest insights, what's worked well and what hasn't worked well, and their input and advice into whatever you do, don't do it this way, don't do what we've done, take the best that we've done, ignore the best. So in terms of that debate around procurement, for me it's a real issue about getting it right, because this is about a people business, as I've said before. So for me, we need to, as an organisation and as a sector, influence and get our voice heard in the policy review. We've done some preliminary work internally with our head of legal services, our head of procurement around procurement options. Our procurement people tell me there are options that aren't full EU procurement. I'd like to see them on paper to test it out, but critically we need to have that debate with the sector. And I value the role that Chris and Ricky and Cameron's co-chairing of that, because that's a vehicle for us to have that dialogue with the sector about shaping and influencing what that looks like. But it is of some interest when you talk to the Hampshires and the Birminghams, the big local authorities, they caution us about the approach we do. That's not to say they haven't adopted procurement and tendering in some instances, but it's not a one-size-fits-all, nor is it a complete package for the whole programme. They adopt it in certain circumstances. So if you go to Hampshire's procurement strategy, it says, if the service is working well and there are good relationships and good outcomes, then don't change it. Don't put it out to tender every 3 to 5 years. Because at the heart of all these projects are the relationships between the housing association and the joint management partner, between the staff and service user, and we need to be mindful of that, and we need to be mindful about driving down costs. That's not the only issue in the sector. So I think there will be a procurement process, there will be a tendering process. Whether it looks like for EU procurement, that's for us to kind of shape and think about. It is important for us in that process. Some of you may be part of, on the other side of the DSD, they've been rolling out on the grant side of the voluntary and community sector, moving away from grants to tendered services. So they've been doing some work with the sector about what that looks like. And we might all need to get smarter about how we work together, about creating intermediaries, about looking at how we work together. But for me, it's a major piece of our policy work at the moment, and one of my team, Anthony Lavery, has been doing some work. We have been part of that process, sitting with the health side and the health board as part of the resettlement target. We're looking at commissioning and procuring one of the resettlement projects. The fact that we're close to March 15 and haven't done that tells you something about that process and that challenge. But we have found it very interesting to be part of that social care discussion, because there is a similar discussion on the health and social care side around a procurement strategy for adult social care. You heard Pamela refer to a few of domiciliary care. Some of those services are put out to procurement. So we're trying to understand how that process works for health and social care, what works well or what doesn't work well, to inform any future process, how we go around it. So I think the process, he'll hear Steve Martin after lunch, but for me, that's one of the greatest achievements. Challenges facing forward. That doesn't mean, well, we don't have a value for view of the overall program, that individual services aren't providing real value for money. And I think that's important for you as a sector to hold on to, that the service you do have provided and do provide real value for money. There will be an argument that the only way you can really test that is put it out to the marketplace. And the final point I want to make on is performance, quality and outcome. Because critical to me for the last 10 years and over the last 3 to 5 years is we've seen fantastic achievements in terms of the outcomes of services for individual service users, in terms of whether it's young people leaving care, single homelessness with addictions, people with dementia. We are seeing people's lives transform from the work that you do with the SP funding that you receive. So while we do a lot of focus on performance and quality and outcomes, it's sometimes, for me, that we don't reflect back strong enough to the sector that we are seeing some tremendous work done. And it's a testament to you and your staff teams and how that's done. So at the heart of it, when we go forward and when we inform the policy review, we need to keep a hold of that fact that the services that are provided, and maybe Phil will tell us a wee bit more after lunch, but what the services we provide, we see as hugely important, delivering fantastic work, and at the heart of it, transforming individual people's lives. And I just wanted to leave on that high note. Thank you.